The sun hung low over the desert plains, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and crimson. Dust swirled around the edges of the quiet frontier town of Silver Creek, the only sound the soft creak of wooden signs swinging in the wind. Amelia Cartwright, a woman of 30 with eyes like storm clouds and hair the color of wheat in the summer sun, rode slowly into town, her horse kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She had lived her whole life in the comfort of wealth and society, but the monotony of luxury had begun to weigh heavily on her. She craved something unpredictable, something raw, something real. Amelia's reputation preceded her, a wealthy widow with a daring spirit, a woman who laughed at danger and flouted society's expectations. But even she had never anticipated the strange twist that fate would deliver that evening. The town's main saloon, the Rusted Spur, was a place where fortunes were lost and made, and where secrets were whispered between pints of whiskey. Amelia pushed through the swinging doors, letting the smoky warmth engulf her. She scanned the room, her sharp eyes noting the card tables, the poker faces, and the occasional brawl subdued by a heavy-handed barkeep. Her lips curved into a playful smirk. Just a game, she reminded herself. She didn't intend to fall for anything here, certainly not a man who would shake her world upside down. And yet, he was there. A figure stood near the back of the saloon, half in shadow, with an aura that seemed to pull the light toward him. He was tall, his shoulders broad, his skin kissed by the desert sun, and his dark eyes, piercing and untamed, followed her without flinching. He was an Apache, a name whispered in awe and fear throughout the frontier, known as Kaelen. He had the calm confidence of someone who had lived his life according to his own rules, and Amelia felt, inexplicably, that the universe had placed him here just for her. She approached the poker table where he sat, his fingers drumming softly against the worn wood, a coy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Care for a game?" she asked, voice light but edged with challenge. Kaelen tilted his head, his eyes glinting with amusement. "A game or a test?" "Call it what you like," she said, seating herself opposite him. She was playing a dangerous game, but that thrill was exactly what she needed. The game began innocuously enough. Cards were dealt, chips stacked, and bets made. But as the hours passed, the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken tension. Kaelen's laugh was deep and rare, a sound that resonated like a distant drum in the canyons. Amelia found herself leaning closer than necessary, captivated not by the game, but by the man who played it with the quiet ferocity of a storm waiting to break. Outside, the desert wind howled against the windows, carrying the scent of sage and sand. Inside, every glance, every brush of hands seemed electric. Amelia reminded herself again, it's just a game, nothing more. But as Kaelen laid down his winning hand, a hand she could not beat, he leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "You play as if you're hiding something," he murmured, his voice like velvet and smoke. Amelia's pulse quickened. For the first time, she realized that perhaps the game had chosen her, not the other way around. She smiled, letting herself enjoy the dangerous pull of it, even as a tiny voice deep within whispered that this was no ordinary encounter. This man, mysterious and powerful, had the ability to unravel everything she thought she knew about herself. As the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the mountains, Amelia stepped out into the cool evening, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Kaelen was already there, waiting, his shadow long against the dusty street. The desert night stretched before them, vast and endless, and for the first time, Amelia felt truly alive. She called it just a game, but the truth was far more dangerous. The streets of Silver Creek were quieter now, the last flickers of lantern light dancing along the wooden facades of shuttered shops. Amelia could still feel the echo of Kaelen's gaze, the way his dark eyes had seemed to pierce straight through her carefully constructed walls. She tugged at the edge of her glove, her heart still pounding from the tension of their first encounter at the saloon. "Just a game," she whispered again. Though the words felt hollow, Kaelen was waiting near the edge of the boardwalk, the desert wind tugging at his long black hair. His bare chest gleamed faintly under the moonlight, the tribal jewelry catching silver flashes in the darkness. He gave her a small, almost teasing nod, and she realized he wasn't just waiting, he was inviting her into something unknown. "You didn't have to follow me out here," she said, trying to mask the nervous tremor in her voice. "I didn't follow," Kaelen said, his tone even deep calm. "I simply wanted to see if the game continued." Amelia's lips curved in a wry smile. The game, indeed. But this game was different. The way he said those words carried weight, as if every syllable held a promise she wasn't prepared to resist. They walked side by side along the dusty street, the town behind them fading into shadows. The desert stretched endlessly in front, a canvas of silver moonlight and whispering winds. Kaelen's presence was magnetic, drawing her attention even as her mind fought to remain rational. "Why are you here?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Why is anyone here, Amelia? Fate? Coincidence? Or perhaps curiosity?" She paused, letting the wind whip strands of hair across her face. "Curiosity," she said softly. "I've never felt it like this before. Not for anyone." Kaelen's gaze softened for the briefest moment, and Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. The desert night seemed to hold its breath, as though the world itself was waiting for what would come next. They stopped near a low mesa overlooking the valley, the town's lights flickering far below. Kaelen knelt on one knee and gestured toward the horizon. "Look there," he said. "See how the desert glows under the moon? There's beauty in the untamed, Amelia, and danger, and life that's raw and real. That's what I live for. That's what I fight for." Amelia's chest tightened. She had always known she was searching for something beyond wealth and comfort, but hearing it voiced so passionately stirred emotions she hadn't admitted even to herself. The game she thought she was playing suddenly felt like a doorway to something far bigger and far more dangerous. "Then teach me," she said, her voice trembling slightly with determination. "Teach me to see the world the way you do." Kaelen's lips curved into a small smile. "Careful what you wish for," he murmured. "Once you cross that line, there's no going back." The wind carried whispers through the sagebrush, and Amelia suddenly felt the fragility of the moment. She had always been in control of her life, always the one to make the rules. But here, in the desert night, she realized she was a player in a game far more intricate than any poker table could offer, and Kaelen held the hand that could change everything. A sudden noise broke the spell. The distant crack of a gunshot from the outskirts of the valley. Amelia startled, and Kaelen immediately rose. Alert and tense, his hand brushing instinctively against the leather strap of a hidden weapon. "Stay close," he commanded softly, his eyes scanning the darkness. "The desert is beautiful, but it's never empty." As they moved cautiously toward the sound, Amelia's mind raced. She had called it a game, had thought she was merely playing at danger and excitement. But now, with Kaelen beside her, muscles taut and senses sharp, she understood that this was real. More real than she had ever imagined, and for the first time she feared losing not her money, not her reputation, but him. The desert night stretched endlessly, mysterious and infinite, carrying them forward into a world neither of them fully understood yet. The game had begun in earnest, and Amelia, for all her bravado, knew she was already falling. The distant echo of gunfire still lingered in the night air, bouncing off the rocky cliffs and carrying across the desert plains. Kaelen's eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the shadows with a predator's precision. His hand hovered near the leather strap that held a concealed pistol, every muscle in his body taut and ready. Amelia stayed close behind him, her pulse racing, heart caught between fear and the undeniable thrill that came with being near him. "Do you hear that?" Kaelen whispered, nodding toward a flicker of light near an old, abandoned homestead on the outskirts of the valley. The building was barely more than a skeleton of charred wood and broken beams, yet a small glow suggested life or danger lurking within. Amelia swallowed hard but nodded. "Yes, we should see if someone needs help. Or if it's trouble." Kaelen's gaze flicked toward her, and for the first time a hint of admiration softened his usually impenetrable expression. "You're braver than most," he murmured. "Or perhaps more reckless." "Maybe a little of both," she said, her lips curving into a small, nervous smile. They crept forward, boots silent against the sand and stone. The desert night was alive with sound, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of sagebrush, and the whispering wind weaving through the canyon. As they approached the homestead, the flickering light became clearer, a fire burning within the ruins, and a figure huddled nearby, hands raised in fear. "Hold," Kaelen said, signaling Amelia to stay back. He stepped into the moonlight, his powerful frame casting a long shadow over the terrified man. "Who's there?" His voice was steady, commanding, yet calm enough to suggest he was in control of any outcome. The figure, a young cowboy no older than 20, flinched. I didn't mean no harm," he stammered, eyes wide with terror. "I was just looking for water. Got separated from my group." Amelia felt a pang of empathy. The boy was small, thin, and desperate, and she could see the dust caked into his clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "It's all right," she said gently. "You're safe now. Come closer." Kaelen studied her for a moment, a faint smile tugging at his lips, before nodding in agreement. The boy approached cautiously, glancing nervously at Kaelen, as if unsure whether the warrior would turn on him. But Kaelen merely relaxed slightly, his eyes never leaving the desert horizon. Once the boy was near, Amelia noticed something strange. A piece of paper clutched in his hand, smudged and torn. "What's that?" she asked. The boy hesitated, then handed it to her. On it were scrawled words that made her stomach twist. "Beware the ones who watch from the cliffs. They do not forgive." Kaelen's expression darkened immediately. "This isn't random," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Someone is tracking us. Or following someone important." Amelia's mind raced. Important? Could it be me? She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying not to betray the fear curling inside her. Kaelen noticed, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "We'll face this together," he said quietly. "No one will touch you without my knowledge." The boy, realizing the danger might be greater than he understood, backed away slightly. Kaelen gave him a firm look. "Go back the way you came. Tell no one about this fire. Understand?" "Yes, sir," the boy said quickly, before disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had arrived. Amelia turned to Kaelen, her heart still racing. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Kaelen's eyes scanned the moonlit desert, muscles still coiled and ready. "If they do, they'll find more than they expect." His voice was calm, but there was a fire in it that made her pulse quicken. He stepped closer to her, the moonlight casting shadows over the hard plains of his muscular body. "And Amelia, this game we began, it's no longer just a game. It's something far more dangerous, something far more real." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't call it a game. The electricity between them was undeniable, and the danger surrounding them made every heartbeat feel sharper, more alive. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and unrelenting. The night held secrets, shadows that whispered promises of danger and desire. Amelia had come seeking adventure, excitement, a thrill. But she had found something else entirely. A man who could match her spirit, challenge her heart, and shake the very foundations of her carefully controlled life. And deep down, she knew the game was no longer in her hands. It was Kaelen's. The desert wind carried a low, mournful sound through the canyons as dawn broke. Pale light stretched across the land, touching the cliffs with shades of rose and gold. Amelia hadn't slept. She sat by the smoldering fire, watching the smoke curl into the fading night, while Kaelen stood a few paces away, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He hadn't said much since the incident near the abandoned homestead. The warning note still burned in her mind. Beware the ones who watch from the cliffs. They do not forgive. Finally, she broke the silence. Who are they, Kaelen? The ones who don't forgive. Kaelen didn't turn at first. His jaw tightened. They're men who've forgotten what honor means. Raiders. Bounty hunters. The kind who sell death for coin. She frowned, her curiosity deepening. But why would they be following us? Kaelen finally turned toward her, the early sunlight brushing against his bronze skin, his long black hair moving with the wind. Because of me, he said quietly. And now, because you're with me. Amelia felt her stomach twist. You mean, I'm in danger because of you? Kaelen's gaze softened. No, he said. You're in danger because of who you chose to follow. His words hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't boasting or apologizing, just speaking truth. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she didn't want to turn back. She'd come to the desert chasing excitement, something to shake her dull, predictable life. But now she was in too deep. Kaelen crouched near the fire and began to pack his small leather satchel. His movements were deliberate, controlled, the actions of a man who had lived through too many hunts. We'll travel west, he said, through the Red Mesa. It's rough terrain, but no one will track us easily there. Amelia rose to her feet, brushing sand from her dress. You sound like a man used to running. He paused, then met her eyes. Not running, he said softly. Surviving. The words lingered in the dry morning air. For the first time, Amelia saw not just a mysterious Apache warrior, but a man burdened by the ghosts of his past. She wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her he wasn't ready to share it, not yet. Hours later, they rode through the Red Mesa canyons. The sun blazed high overhead, and the world shimmered with heat. Amelia's horse kicked up trails of red dust behind them as they wound through narrow passes and jagged cliffs. Kaelen led the way with ease, his instincts guiding them like a compass of the soul. They stopped near a stream to rest, the sound of water a rare comfort in the desert silence. Amelia knelt to wash her hands, her reflection rippling in the water beside Kaelen's. Do you ever miss it? She asked quietly. He looked at her, puzzled. Miss what? Peace, a normal life. Something. Simple, Kaelen chuckled softly, a sound that carried both sadness and warmth. I was born into a world that never offered peace. When I was a boy, I thought love could bring it. But love... He paused, eyes distant. Love has its own wars. Amelia looked up, her breath catching at the raw honesty in his voice. And did you lose that war? She asked gently. Kaelen's jaw flexed, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, quietly, he said, Yes, and I swore never to fight it again. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of pain, of memory, of something neither dared to name. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Then maybe it's time to break that vow. Kaelen's dark eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a spark that neither could deny. The air felt heavier, charged with emotion. He took a slow step toward her, his hand lifting to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was soft but powerful, like lightning barely restrained. But before another word could pass between them, a shadow moved on the ridge above, a silhouette. Watching. Kaelen's hand went instantly to his weapon, his body snapping back into defense. "We've been found," he said sharply. "Mount up." Amelia's heart hammered. She grabbed her reins as Kaelen vaulted onto his horse, his muscles flexing as the sunlight caught his tribal jewelry. They rode hard, the thunder of hooves echoing off canyon walls. Dust and wind and adrenaline filled the air. Behind them, dark riders appeared on the cliffs, moving fast, their shouts carried by the wind. The game was long over. This was survival now, and somewhere between fear and fire, Amelia realized she wasn't just following Kaelen anymore. She was fighting for him. The canyon roared with the echo of galloping hooves. Dust rose behind them in wild spirals, and the sharp crack of gunfire split the morning air. Amelia gripped her reins tighter, her heart slamming in her chest. Kaelen rode ahead, his long black hair whipping in the wind, muscles flexing as he guided his horse through the narrow passes of the Red Mesa. "Stay low," he shouted, glancing back over his shoulder. Bullets struck the rocks beside them, sending shards flying. Amelia ducked instinctively, her dress torn by the rough wind. The riders behind them were gaining ground. 5 men, faces masked, rifles glinting in the sunlight. Kaelen's eyes narrowed. He knew the kind. Bounty hunters. Men who hunted for gold and glory. And he knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. He yanked his horse to the left, leading Amelia through a steep crevice between 2 towering cliffs. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for their horses, but it offered cover. Gunshots echoed off the stone walls, sounding closer than they were. They burst into a hidden ravine, a dry riverbed that cut through the desert like a scar. Kaelen slowed his horse, listening for pursuit. The air was still now, too still. Only the distant call of a hawk broke the silence. Amelia dismounted, her legs trembling. "Are they gone?" Kaelen shook his head, scanning the canyon rim. "Not gone, waiting. They'll circle around." He turned toward her, his expression hard but calm. "We need to move fast. They'll know this land too." Amelia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her hand shook as she brushed hair from her face. "Kaelen, why are they after you? Who are you to them?" He hesitated. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, with a sigh, he said, "They're after a debt." "When I didn't know? When my brother did?" Amelia's brows furrowed. "Your brother?" Kaelen nodded, his eyes darkening. "Years ago, he was taken by a group of men who promised peace between settlers and my people. Instead, they sold him to the army as a guide. When he escaped, they blamed me for his betrayal. They swore they'd make me pay in blood." Amelia's heart ached. "And you've been running ever since?" "Not running," he said firmly. "I've been waiting. But they never came for me alone. They always hurt the people around me. That's why I live alone, why I trust no one." His gaze softened, meeting hers. "Until you." The words hit her like a thunderclap. She looked at him, at the raw honesty in his eyes. "Kaelen," she began, but before she could finish, another gunshot rang out. The bullet struck the sand inches from her boot. Kaelen pulled her down instantly, shielding her with his body. "They found us," he said through clenched teeth. From the cliffs above, 2 riders appeared, rifles ready. Kaelen drew his revolver, fired once, 1 man fell. The other shouted and fired back. The bullet grazed Kaelen's shoulder, tearing through the flesh. He winced but stayed steady, his face hard with focus. He fired again, and the second rider toppled from his horse. Amelia scrambled toward him, her hands trembling as she pressed them against his bleeding shoulder. You're hurt. It's nothing, he said, his breath ragged. We need to keep moving. No, she said sharply, her eyes fierce. You've done enough for me. You saved me. Now let me save you. Kaelen stared at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. He didn't argue. Slowly, she tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound, her hand steady despite the fear in her heart. Their eyes met, close enough to feel each other's breath. Why do you care so much? He asked softly. Because what started as a game, she whispered, isn't one anymore. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to fade, the cliffs, the danger, the blood. There was only them, two souls caught in a war neither had planned, but both were fighting with everything they had left. Kaelen finally nodded, his jaw tight. Then we fight together. She smiled faintly. Together. As the sun dipped lower, painting the desert gold, Kaelen guided his horse toward the west. Amelia rode beside him, her heart both terrified and alive. Behind them, the bounty hunters' bodies lay still among the stones. Ahead, the unknown waited dot, but for the first time, Amelia wasn't afraid of it. She had found her reason to keep riding, and his name was Kaelen. The desert night wrapped itself around the canyon like a living thing, quiet, vast, and humming with unseen life. The fire crackled low between them, its glow dancing across Kaelen's chiseled features and the curve of Elara's pale cheek. She had cleaned his wound as best as she could, tearing her dress into strips to bind it. Now she sat beside him, knees drawn to her chest, watching the firelight flicker in his dark eyes. You should rest, she said softly. You've lost too much blood. Kaelen's voice came low, like gravel shaped by wind. Apache heal fast. You should sleep. But neither did. The stars were bright and merciless above them, and the silence between them was deeper than the canyon itself. Elara turned her face to the night sky, whispering, You saved me again. I don't understand why. Kaelen looked at her, the fire painting his bronze skin in shades of gold and red. You are not my enemy, he said. Not anymore. Something in his tone made her heart falter. She had told herself this was a game, a thrill, a secret escape from the loneliness of her husband's ranch and her predictable life. She'd wanted to feel alive again. But now, sitting beside this man, wild, wounded, and impossibly proud, she realized something terrifying. It wasn't a game anymore. He was real, Dot, and she was falling in love. Kaelen. She said his name like a confession. When you first saw me, that day near the river, what did you think? He smiled faintly, a slow, dangerous smile that carried both warmth and warning. I thought you were lost. Like a coyote that wandered too far from its home. Elara laughed quietly, then looked away, her voice trembling. Maybe I was. The sound of distant coyotes echoed through the canyon, haunting and lonely. Kaelen shifted slightly, wincing from the pain in his shoulder. Without thinking, Elara reached out, her hand resting gently on his chest. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm, strong, grounded and calm. Kaelen froze, then met her eyes. You should not touch me, he said quietly. Why? She whispered. Because I will not stop you. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elara didn't move her hand. Instead, she leaned closer, close enough to see the scar along his jaw, the line of strength in his neck. Maybe I don't want to stop. Kaelen's hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a strand of her hair from her face. His touch was careful, reverent, as though he feared she might vanish if he held her too tight. I do not belong to your world, he said, and you cannot live in mine. Tears welled in her eyes. Then where do we belong? Kaelen's gaze softened. Here, he said finally, placing her hand over his heart again. For now. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling low. the night carrying their unspoken words into the vast emptiness around them. But peace was fragile in the Fey West. Just before dawn, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Kaelen stood instantly, pulling her to her feet. "Go," he ordered, his voice hard again. "Who is it?" "Riders. Too many." She could see them now, dark silhouettes moving along the canyon rim, rifles glinting in the pale light. Her heart pounded. "Kaelen, they're coming for you, for us." He turned to her, eyes burning with the calm of a man ready to fight. "If I die, you run east. Follow the river until you find safety. I'm not leaving you." He looked at her, truly looked, and something broke inside him. He cupped her face in his rough hand and kissed her forehead. "You said it was a game," he whispered. "Do not make it your grave." Then he mounted his horse, blood seeping through his bandage, and rode toward the rising dust, toward the men who wanted him dead. Elara screamed his name into the wind, but the desert only answered with silence, and in that silence, she finally knew she had fallen in love with a man the world would never let her have. The morning sun rose red over the desert, the kind of red that looked like blood in the sand. Smoke still hung in the air from gunfire. The canyon that had echoed with thunder now lay in silence, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Elara stumbled through the dust, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears and soot. Her voice cracked as she shouted into the wind, "Kaelen!" Kaelen, no answer. Only the faint rustle of wind through dry brush. She climbed over a ridge, her boots slipping on the loose stones. Below, near the dried riverbed, she saw them, 3 men sprawled lifeless in the sand, their hats blown away, rifles beside them. And in the middle of it all, Kaelen. He was on his knees, his chest heaving, blood darkening his bandages. His horse stood behind him, loyal and trembling. He looked up when he heard her voice, his face ghostly pale in the rising light. "Elara," he whispered, his voice raw. "You should not have come." She ran to him, falling to her knees before him. "You fool," she cried. "You said I should run." Kaelen's smile was weak, but his eyes, those dark, steady eyes, were still full of life. "You don't listen," he said softly. "Even now." She pressed her hands to his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "I can't lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "Not after everything. Not after I finally know what this really is." Kaelen reached up, his rough hand brushing her cheek. "You called it a game," he said, his tone faint but steady. "But you played it with your heart." Tears slid down her face. "Then it's no longer a game. It hasn't been for a long time." Kaelen's gaze drifted toward the horizon. The sun was climbing higher now, painting the canyon in shades of gold and crimson. "My people are far from here," he murmured. "I thought I would die alone in this desert. But now—" He looked back at her, eyes softening. "Now I die knowing someone will remember my name." Elara gripped his hand tightly, shaking her head. "No, you're not dying. I'll take you to town. We'll find help." He cut her off with a quiet laugh that broke into a cough. "The town will hang me before they heal me." She froze. Deep down, she knew he was right. To the world, he was still an outlaw, a savage. To her, he was everything. Kaelen's breathing grew slower. "You came from another world, Elara," he said, his words soft as the wind. "You don't belong in mine." Her tears fell on his skin. "Then I'll stay anyway." Kaelen smiled faintly, that same half-smile that had haunted her since the day they met by the river. "If the spirits allow," he whispered, "I'll find you again, where there's no more war." And then, like the last echo of a drum fading into the canyon, his hand went still in hers. The desert was silent again. Elara held him, her sobs lost to the wind. The morning sun rose higher, and she pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "Then I'll wait for you." wherever the spirits take me." Hours passed before she finally stood. She wrapped Kaelen's body in his blanket, laid him beneath a smooth stone, and placed his turquoise necklace atop it. Her fingers trembled as she whispered the Apache words he had taught her, a prayer for safe passage. When she turned toward the horizon, her eyes burned with a new kind of fire. She wasn't going back to town. She wasn't going back at all. Weeks later, travelers passing through the canyon told stories of a white woman living alone near the river, wearing beads and feathers, painting the cliffs with strange symbols. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she was guarding something sacred. But those who rode close enough to see her face told a different story, that her eyes carried both sorrow and peace, as though she were waiting for someone beyond the horizon. And on nights when the wind whispered through the canyon, they swore they heard the sound of an Apache flute, haunting and beautiful, answering her voice in the dark. Because love, once real, never truly ends, even if it began as only a game.